years away. They're among the smallest ever found. That's the latest. I'm Anna Russell.
Love Sport Radio, on digital radio, online, mobile and smart speaker. This is the Get European Football Show on Love Sport.
You are listening to Love Sport with me, Matt Beadle, with you until 10:30 this evening. This is the Get European Football Show. I'm joined by the guys from Get Football, Adam White and Jeremy Smith. A jam-packed show ahead tonight. We're going to be talking Real Madrid summer spending. Julian Nagelsmann's move to Leipzig. Obviously, he has gone from Hoffenheim. Carlo Ancelotti's second season at Napoli. And André Villas-Boas' arrival at Marseille. Plus, Nicolas Pepe's potential move to Arsenal. £72 million. We are led to believe they're not in for Will Zaha. Nicolas Pepe is going to be the man to light up the Emirates next season. Plenty coming up, guys. Adam, Jeremy, how you doing?
We're doing good, thanks, Matt. How are you?
Very, very well, thanks. So, talk us through what's coming up.
Yeah, we're going to be here every Monday night from 9 until 10:30 talking European football and the top 5 leagues. And we figure we start tonight's show with a look back at the week just gone, the week of transfers. And one particular transfer really stands out across the European landscape, which is Nicolas Pepe and his impending move, it seems, to Arsenal, Jez. The right fit for Pepe at Arsenal?
I think it could be, yeah. I mean, it's been one of the sagas of the summer. Everyone seems to have been linked to him. Just in England, there's been teams from United to Arsenal to even Everton. Liverpool, obviously, were one of the supposed big front runners. You've got Napoli, Bayern Munich. So whether it's Lille and Pepe's agent generating the stories or there was genuine interest, he seemed to be one of the sort of big draws of the summer. So for Arsenal, who obviously aren't at the peak of their form compared to sort of 10 to 15 years ago, and no Champions League to look forward to next year, for them to look like they're bringing him in is a massive coup.
What do you think Arsenal get with Nicolas Pepe? How does he improve their team? Where do you see him sort of fitting in?
Although he's left-footed, he's obviously strongest on the right wing, sort of cutting in a bit like, I guess, Robin is the obvious analogy. I think he could fit in perfectly with the front three. He's got the ability to fit into different systems. So if there's playing 4-4-2, he could play as a wide man. 4-3-3, he could play alongside, say, Lacazette and Aubameyang, and also as Lille did a few times last year, kind of a three with another central striker. In some cases it was Rafael Leao last year. He can fit into that system as well. So there may be an issue in terms of Aubameyang, who doesn't seem to be too keen on playing on the left-hand side. So there might be the two of them vying for a place on the right. But if at least one of them is able to adapt, then I think it gives Emery a lot of really positive options going forward. Yeah,
there definitely is a lot of options when you include him in their squad. It'd be interesting to see how his Lille form and how he was deployed at Lille translates to Unai Emery's Arsenal, because I think that there's a situation where Arsenal set up in a similar way as they did away at Valencia in the Europa League semi-final, when they played pretty concrete five at the back and looked to counter-attack, and that obviously worked out really well for them. Fantastic in that first half. It'd be interesting to see whether Pepe is included in a similar situation for the bigger games, because Lille play in a very sort of similar way at times last season, the way that they soaked up pressure and counter-attack. There are some fantastic examples of Lille goals last season where they win the ball back, sometimes by Pepe, inside their own half, and a quick sort of exchange of passes and they're in, often rounded off by Pepe as well. So it'd be interesting to see if Emery deploys him in a similar way, and perhaps they go with a three going forward. You mentioned Aubameyang not particularly keen on playing wide. Perhaps a situation where Lacazette and Aubameyang play together, and Nicolas Pepe plays off them. He's in a really interesting story, Pepe, because he started out as a teenager playing in goal, and he sort of progressed through the amateur ranks of French football, which is a little bit unusual compared to some more established French internationals or players that have come through Ligue 1, where they've graduated from one of the sort of prestigious academies, Clairefontaine or Le Havre, for example, Lyon. More recently, but he sort of found a little bit of an unorthodox route via Angers, and then it was on loan at Orléans in National for a season. I think he won Player of the Year that year, and he struggled a little bit with attitude issues. He talked in an interview recently about managers having to sort of scream at him to get the best out of him, and he was told by one coach to shave a particularly sort of garish blonde Mohican off because it sort of didn't send the right message. And he's really developed in that sense, and he talks a lot about being humble now and making the best of his talent. Where do you see him going from Arsenal? Is this a step in the right direction? Is this about the right level, or is there a Real Madrid transfer in 2 seasons' time? We'll be here again with another transfer saga.
It's definitely the right move for this stage of his career. He's 24. He's just coming towards his peak. He's had, as you said, a kind of slow burner of a career up till now. But in the last 18 months, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, he's just a one-season wonder." But already the second half of the previous season, he was really showing signs of kind of moving up a level. So I think moving abroad, obviously with the additional pressure and also the salary that comes with it, was the natural next step. And I don't think he was necessarily ready to go to the very top sort of Champions League challenging teams. But Arsenal, I think, is the perfect step. And if he can continue his upward curve, then there's a bigger transfer in the offing in a couple of years' time. But obviously, if he really gels with the front three and sort of pushes Arsenal back into Champions League contention, then who knows? Maybe he won't want to move anyway.
We're being quite positive about it, as we have in the second half of this last season. But if you look at his body of work so far, last season was a real standout campaign for him. He really, really exploded last season, as did Lille under Christophe Galtier, who completely changed his philosophy from when he was at Saint Etienne, and they got increasingly more boring as Galtier was over the 8 years in charge at Saint Etienne. And last season, having miraculously, I think, kept Lille in the division the season before, they became this counter-attacking, gung-ho almost at times team with Pepe and Bamba, Jonathan Bamba and Jonathan Ikone, who formed a trio that the French press call Beep in reference to the cartoon character, the Roadrunner, the sound he makes because of the speed. Is there a danger that this is a one-season wonder? Is this a danger that he can't replicate this form in the Premier League, given that he was up and down at Angers the year before? He had attitude issues previously, although he seems to have rectified that. Is there a situation where this flops?
It's a concern, and I guess that there's always a possibility that could happen. But I mean, to an extent, Lille's season last year was a sort of perfect storm of a season. It was sort of reminiscent of Montpellier when they won the league a few years back, where it was just a relatively small group of players who generally stayed fit and just seemed to be having a great time playing with each other. And the system really played to Pepe's strengths, as you said, sort of soak up the pressure and then hit teams fast on the break. So it remains to be seen how he adapts to a different system and how I guess a different system adapts to him and where they accommodate him. But I think he showed that he's got enough ability. From a Premier League point of view, he showed that he's willing to trap back and muck in and help the defence. So I think that all the raw materials are there. There's no reason why he can't succeed, and certainly under Galtier at Lille last season, there was clearly a great team spirit amongst the team, and you certainly see that at Arsenal between Aubameyang and Lacazette. They clearly get on very well. If Pepe can sort of break into that clique, then hopefully he can sort of engender the same feel good factor that they had at Lille and sort of push on from there. Yeah,
I definitely think that shows in his attitude as well. The way that Lille would definitely were a very together squad, and he's sort of self-conscious. He said a number of times sort of to try and improve his attitude. He said that he was originally a player that just wanted to play for himself, and now he wants to play for the team, and that definitely showed at Lille last season. They were a cohesive attacking unit, which obviously Arsenal will hope to become with him as part of their squad. It'd be really interesting to see how he does in the Premier League. Obviously, he doesn't have any experience outside France when you think about it, and hasn't played European football of any kind so far. Obviously, just playing with Lille, who have been come out of the doldrums in the last couple of years, and obviously at Angers and Orléans too. They're not European teams, so it'd be really interesting to see how, even though it's Europa League football, how he adapts to that, and also the quicker pace of that schedule of playing Thursday, Sunday, or whatever Arsenal end up playing. It'd be interesting to see whether he can have that, because French teams in the past have really struggled with that, and interesting to see if that translates to Pepe's move to Arsenal.
I think that he's looking at last season. One thing in his favour is that he performed in the big matches, and obviously the standout one is that 5-1 Lille win over PSG, where he scored 1 and set up 2. So unlike certain other French players who both massaged their own stats as the season went on and also went missing in the big matches, Pepe, I think, first of all seemed as happy providing assists as he was scoring, and also was sort of present for those big matches and didn't shirk away from the bigger challenges.
Yeah, for sure. You can sort of reel off the occasions when he performed against the bigger teams. There was that he scored a brilliant goal against Saint Etienne away at Saint Etienne, who were a European challenger to Lille at the time. 1-0. They won that game 1-0 later on a wave with a brilliant counter attack. The original game against Saint Etienne, the first game that season, he was pivotal to win in that win. Scored a fantastic goal against Lyon in a 2-2 draw in December, where I think it really shows something that's really developed in his game this season, where he's become a lot more clinical. And he's taken his chances when Angers was perhaps a little bit erratic, younger, developing player. But there's a brilliant sort of just pretty neat through ball from Loic Remy, and he just casually sort of nonchalantly flicks the ball through. I think it's Marcel covering defenders' legs and into the far corner, and that kind of became indicative, especially in the second half of the season, of the type of goal he would score and the type of performance he would put in. Because we were talking before we came on that there was a shift in his sort of goal tally. We mentioned last week that 9 of those 22, I think, league goals were penalties, but in the second half of the season that balance really started to shift, and we saw even over the course of the season him sort of on an upward trajectory, I think. We've only got a few minutes before the break, so what we'll do is we'll talk about a couple of more transfers that happened this week. Idrissa Gueye to PSG, is that the type of player from Everton that PSG need?
I think he's exactly the kind of player that PSG needs and have needed for 2 or 3 years now. You sort of hesitate to use the Makelele role cliche, but it's difficult to think of any team that's had any kind of success without that kind of player filling that sort of very ungrateful role in the middle. And PSG have sort of tried to go the Galactico route and just fill the team with star names. And the fact is, you need someone there who's quietly getting on with the job of shielding the defence and winning the ball back. Some Everton fans say that he's not a great football player. But in a sense, that's not what they need. They need this defensive shield. He almost joined them in January. It didn't quite happen. He clearly wants to go there. So I think Everton are probably, I'm assuming there's maybe some kind of gentleman's agreement to let him go this summer as long as they find a replacement. It's possibly not the most glamorous, exciting of moves for some PSG fans, but it could prove to be the biggest move of the summer from their point of view. For
sure, there were shades of Odemwingie of turning up in Paris, trying to force a move at the end of the transfer window. But I think that this is a position that Thomas Tuchel's been desperate to fill. With incoming arrivals of Paredes, who didn't really fit in. There's talk of him leaving already, having signed in January for 40 million, and of course Adrien Rabiot being left out. It's a situation that's really sort of got out of hand at PSG.
Lassana Diarra sort of tried and failed as well.
Yeah, and then he sort of left halfway through the season, and there's a massive hole in the PSG squad. So it's a good addition. One final thing, very briefly, Rafa Leao from Lille. Seems to be going to Milan for 35 million. What do Milan get from Leao, another Lille player?
I think he looks a fantastic prospect, and he wasn't. I don't think Lille had any intention of selling him this summer, but the figures being quoted or offered from a range of teams. I think there's 8 teams that have made offers for him around 40 million euros. The salary offers as well. I think it's turned both Lille's and Leao's heads, and he looks a complete striker already at only sort of 19, able to hold the ball up, play with his back to goal, but also sort of bear down on goal, good in the air, good finish. I know Everton were quite strongly linked at one point, and there's quite a few Everton fans who are disappointed he's not making that move. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, he was one of those who sort of played in front of that beat front three for Lille, and really was at 19, obviously there's room for improvement, but looks like he's got all the makings of being a top clinical finisher.
Peter Odemwingie, fellas, not the first time I've heard that today, and I don't think it's going to be the last time we hear it before the transfer window is out. And just to confirm, every man and his dog and every woman, every reporter and fan and their dogs has been saying Nicolas Pepe. At the start of the show you said Nicola Pepe. Is that what it is?
Yeah,
It's Nicola Pepe. Right, you heard it here on Love Sport. It's Nicola, everybody, not Nicholas, for crying out loud. Right, this is the Get European Football Show on Love Sport. Up next, Real Madrid.
Giving your team a voice. Love Sport Radio. have come from. This is Love Sport.
You are listening to the Get European Football Show on Love Sport. Myself, Matt Beadle, joined by Adam White and Jeremy Smith. Right, now we are going to be talking all things Real Madrid now and their summer spending. In excess of £300 million being spent at the Bernabeu this summer. We've seen Eden Hazard go there. We've seen Luka Jovic go there. Ferland Mendy, Rodrigo. The list is endless. Is there going to be any more? Glad to say we've got Robbie Dunne of AS English on the line. Robbie, what do you make of all this spending at the Bernabeu this summer?
Yeah, it looks like Zinedine Zidane came in. He came back in at the end of obviously of last year. Probably didn't go to plan. He was given, or he was told he was going to be given carte blanche in the transfer market. They got a lot of deals done early, and everyone, which kind of signifies that they had their homework done and they knew what they were trying to do. But as it turns out now, the one deal that Zidane really wants to get over the line, which is Pogba, he can't. And the other exits that he's trying to manufacture, i.e. Bale and James Rodriguez, it looks like they're going to stay put too. So kind of a bit of a mixed bag, really. They signed some youth talent, Luka Jovic, obviously Ferland Mendy, players like that, but I'm not entirely sure what they will add to the team. So, yeah, definitely a bit of a mixed bag at Real Madrid this summer.
Robbie, I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of the summer as a whole, and is there an expectation in Madrid that you sort of touched on it there, that do these players improve the team? Because obviously Madrid had a pretty terrible season by their standards last time around, and apart from Hazard, I don't know if Mendy or Militao or Jovic go and improve the team. Is there an expectation that they will come in and hit the ground running?
Yeah, well, I guess so. I mean, I suppose we tend to get blinded by teams throwing money around, and we just assume that when there's movement, it's good, and that obviously isn't always necessarily the case. Based on what we saw in New Jersey against Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid's problems still persist. They've got an ageing midfield. They've got issues with motivation, with work rate. I'd say there's several issues there in terms of Zidane's style of play and the players he wants and the players he currently has, and not being able to implement his strategy, I'd say. You would say so. I mean, Luka Jovic, but they are still young, so those players that came in are backups. The only player who's going to start 100% is Eden Hazard. He's also all the players that were brought in then maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Dani Ceballos, Theo Hernandez, Mayoral, who came up from the La Fabrica. They're all being sold off. So I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure what their strategy is per se. So, but yeah, these players were brought in to add something to the team, but they haven't done so far. And I know it's only pre-season, but a lot of them have suffered from injuries as well. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure where they're going with this, to be honest with you.
You mentioned the Atletico result and also Zidane's style of management. How untouchable is he? Because for him to come back into the club, and he seems to have a lot more power than he had beforehand, is he sort of exempt from any blame for anything that happens this season, or is he still sort of in a relatively vulnerable position?
Yeah, well, what we saw when he left a year ago after that third Champions League final, he went to Florentino Perez and he said that I want Ronaldo. Apparently, this is what was reported. I want Ronaldo to stay. I want Bale gone, and I want the Galactico brought in, someone maybe like Neymar. And Florentino's counter offer was that Ronaldo, he didn't know what was going to happen. Bale was staying, and there was no Galacticos arriving, and that's when Zidane said adios, I think, and obviously he left, and Julian Lopetegui came in, Santiago Solari came in. Both of them just fell flat on their faces, and Zidane was called back, and he was told, listen, this is your show now, you take over. But as we know at Real Madrid, it doesn't take a lot of time or a lot of that many poor results for that kind of sheen to wear off, and that has, because aside from that Atletico Madrid game, of course, they played Rayo Vallecano and lost in Vallecas last season, and Zidane came out and said, we can never, as Real Madrid, we can never play like that. But the same thing happened a couple of weeks later against Real Sociedad. They were really poor. And now it's after happening against Arsenal, and that first half was fairly dour. And then against Atletico Madrid, it was just absolutely unacceptable and unsustainable the way that they played. They conceded 7 goals, 5 in the first half, looked dreadful throughout. So no, I mean, and also it looks like Florentino Perez is pushing back on a lot of his plans, which were, I want Gareth Bale out of Real Madrid because I don't fancy him as a footballer. There's personal issues. There's a personality clash there. His agent has rubbed Zidane up the wrong way, referred to him as a disgrace, things like that. And then also he wanted James gone. James kicked up a little bit of a fuss 2 years ago before he went to Bayern when he wanted more game time. Zidane said Zidane wouldn't give it to him, and James kind of threw a little bit of a huff coming off the field a couple of times. So Zidane wanted him gone, but now it looks like James is going to stay and Bale is going to stay. So yeah, definitely Florentino is pushing back, because if those results aren't coming, then Zidane's stance and Zidane's position is automatically weakened, I'd say.
It really does feel like that there are, as you mentioned there, you sort of touched on it, that there are endemic issues at the club that have persisted over the course of the previous 3 managers, if you include Zidane twice, the end since Zidane's previous reign. How do they go about solving this? Is there a sense that in the Madrid press that they return to, with Florentino Perez as president, they return to sort of the Galactico spending? One, is there potential for that? Is there the budget for that? And is there the expectation that players like Pogba will be joining? Are they just waiting for further recruitments in Madrid, or is this the team they're expecting to start the season with?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's an interesting question, because it's almost like something similar to what Barcelona that's happened at Barcelona with a lot of their aging players. I mean, a lot of these Real Madrid players have quite literally won everything. They won 4 Champions Leagues, 3 in a row, and they've had unprecedented success. They won a La Liga, countless World Cup, Club World Cups, and it feels like, I mean, who's going to tell us? It's almost like these things come in cycles. So at the end of the road for this team, it's kind of like, who's going to tell Sergio Ramos what to do at this stage? Toni Kroos is in that team based on pure reputation at this point, and the changing face of football, I'd say, like you look at the likes of maybe Liverpool, Man City, very data analysis driven, and it's all performance based, whereas Real Madrid is still very much personality based. So I don't know where they go from here. I mean, Sergio Ramos's performances have been up and down for the last year or so. Toni Kroos has been a former Real Madrid manager, and a German, referred to him as a diesel tractor running around the field. He just kind of sputtering along. Like Modric came back after the World Cup, he was poor. I don't know where they go. Do they just keep spending massive? But we've seen that that's impossible, because they can't keep up with the likes of PSG, who are willing to spend 200 million euro on a player and can do it. Real Madrid can't do that every year, so they're going to have to think of a new way to both remain that kind of massive super club that they are, while also blooding young talent in through it. And I'm not entirely sure how that happens, or how smooth a transition that's going to be.
How big a blow is losing Asensio for a lot of the season, and what implications does that have on Bale and obviously the China rumours aside, yeah. Does it affect his or James' position at all?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure Asensio, as far as Real Madrid go, it's not a blow. But for Asensio, the player, obviously it is. He's in his early 20s. He has suffered with a lack of kind of development. He hasn't really exploded the way they thought he would, kind of stagnated to some extent. And this was going to be a massive summer for him. There was reports coming out in early summer that if the right offer came in for him, that they might be willing to sell him. But his agents kind of countered that and said, listen, Real Madrid count on Marco. He's a player for the future. He's their great white hope, and this is his year. He didn't want to go on to the Euro under-21s with Spain, because he wanted to start from kilometre zero, as they refer to it here in Spain. He wanted to be here from day one of the pre-season. So it was him kind of pushing that narrative as he was the man. Whereas Real Madrid, I mean, they've got players like Rodrigo, Kubo, who has looked excellent in pre-season, Vinicius, who they probably want to get game time soon enough and see what he's made of. So the club, and they said then once he did get injured, maybe maybe Ceballos, the Ceballos deal might get scuppered. And I was thinking it doesn't really affect any of that really per se, because they had those young players, and it was going to be a fight for that right wing, and it wasn't Asensio's nailed down, so it didn't really change much as far as I was concerned, really.
Brilliant stuff. Robbie Dunne of Ass English, thank you very much.
No problem, guys.
Jez, I'd love to get your thoughts on Ferland Mendy, a Ligue 1 addition to the Real Madrid squad at left back. Competition for Marcelo or an automatic starter?
I think at this stage, competition for Marcelo. I don't think he walks straight into the team. Excellent potential left back, but still relatively raw. At times, still looks like a kind of penalty concession waiting to happen. And like lots of modern fullbacks, looks slightly more comfortable going forward and supporting the attack than he is defensively. But he's certainly got a lot of defensive nous about him as well. And I think if he can be sort of an effective double for Marcelo, at least for the next season or so, while he adjusts to his new surroundings, I think he could become a top defender in the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's a little bit raw. He needs to need some nurturing. But Marcelo's form has dropped off the edge of a cliff. The player that stood out so fantastically, had a fantastic game in that Champions League final win over Atletico Madrid, and he scored in extra time. That player seems to have disappeared. And I don't know. I think Mendy probably won't start the season, but he could easily sort of work his way into the team over the course of the year. One final point on Real Madrid in a sort of a French context. How do you perceive Karim Benzema's sort of career in general? I realise it's a large question for the time we've got, but when he looks back, will he think that the trophies he's won, the goals he's scored, that it was obviously a very good career, or will he think what might have been? Because at Lyon he was the main man. He looked like the player that could really push on for a Ballon d'Or or to be up there in one of the best players in the world. But he spent a lot of his career sort of as Cristiano Ronaldo's right hand man. Which side of the fence do you fall?
I think that there's probably worse places to spend your career than and the fact that Ronaldo was happy to play alongside him for so long probably speaks to what a good team ethic he has for Real Madrid. And certainly you look back on his club career and there's got to be very few regrets.
True.
Very few kind of what ifs. But obviously the big elephant in the room, I guess, is his France career. And there's so many sort of Benzema supporters who constantly say it's ridiculous, he's so much better than Giroud every time a France squad comes out, still after the World Cup. I don't think anyone, including Deschamps and Giroud, would dispute that Benzema is a better footballer, but it was never about that. It was about team ethic. It was about trying your hardest when you put on the blue shirt, and Benzema never seemed to show that he cared that much. He never performed as well for France, and he did cause tension within the squad. At the end of it, when he sort of implied that Deschamps might have been racist, that really was the final straw, and the bottom line is France are world champions. So it turned out they didn't need him after all.
Indeed, the career of Karim Benzema. I think I agree with you, Jeremy. The fact that he spent the majority of it at the Bernabeu probably has done all right for himself. That was Spain. After this, we're going to be moving our attentions to Germany and RB Leipzig.
This is Love Sport, the Novotel. This is Love Sport.
Good evening, this is Love Sport. You're listening to the Get European Football Show. Me, Matt Beadle, here with Adam White and Jeremy Smith of Get Football. Now, if you want to join the discussion, very easy to do so. You can either call or WhatsApp us, 0208 70 20 558. Join us on the socials at Love Sport Radio on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And I must say as well, we are streaming live. If you want to see the lovely, glistening, yet slightly sweaty faces. Yes, we don't have any aircon in our studio this evening, so it is slightly hot, but Adam and Jeremy are holding it out live on YouTube now. Just search Get European Football Show on YouTube. Now, gents, we're going to move over to the Bundesliga, and Julian Nagelsmann, who has taken over at RB Leipzig this summer, of course, was at Hoffenheim, at one point the youngest manager in the Bundesliga at the age of 28, I believe, at Hoffenheim. A good move for him.
It feels like it. I think there's a really interesting sort of nuance to this. As in, Nagelsmann was sort of linked heavily with Bayern Munich, and he's very sort of like, he very much likes to honour his contracts, and he had a year left on his Hoffenheim deal, and basically the opportunity didn't come at the right time for him. And it really feels like, given his philosophy and his development of young players, that this is the perfect marriage of coach and club. You look at Leipzig, and they did fantastically last season under Ralf Rangnick. Once more, he sort of keeps taking over as a sort of interim coach when they can't find a successor, and he's there for a season, does fantastically, and leaves again. He sort of gets a reputation for being a reluctant coach. But it'd be interesting to see whether Nagelsmann can develop on what Rangnick started last season. Very, very considered, very intelligent football manager. Was linked with the England job, I believe, at one point. But it'd be interesting to see whether Nagelsmann can develop that young squad onto the next level, whether he has the wherewithal to improve upon what was a fantastic season. It'd be interesting to see where they go from here. And we're joined now by Ronan Murphy of Goal.com. And I was hoping to get your thoughts on just that, Ronan. Where do Leipzig go from here? Is it possible for Nagelsmann to come in and improve on what was a fantastic season under Ralf Rangnick at Leipzig last season?
Yeah, I think that's the intention with bringing in a head coach like Nagelsmann. He is kind of the next step for them. Ralf Rangnick himself is kind of known as a master tactician, and I think Nagelsmann is an extension of that. It's the next level for them if they want to push on and maybe challenge Bayern Munich at the top of the Bundesliga, because maybe they're the only team with the resources that can, because of the way the ownership works in Germany. They can get around the kind of fan-owned model that every other club has, so they can maybe spend money in the long term and bring in the sort of players that can challenge Bayern Munich. And he is maybe the head coach that can develop these players and turn them into stars capable of competing at that level.
So what would you say that Leipzig's realistic goals are for the coming season and possibly maybe, a sort of 3-4 year plan under Nagelsmann?
Yeah, I think this season maybe they're looking at coming second to Bayern Munich. I'd say that's probably the goal, or maybe challenging Borussia Dortmund to be runners-up. I know they finished as runners-up in the past, but I think that's maybe something that they look to solidify as a Champions League team year in, year out, and at the very top of the table, not just kind of getting in by the skin of their teeth on the last day or with a couple of games to go. I think they need to ensure that they're a Champions League side every year, and that's probably the short-term goal anyway. And for the next 3 or 4 years, maybe to build on that and get to the knockout stage of the Champions League, and maybe even look to bring the title race down to the wire and challenge Bayern all the way for the Bundesliga title. Is
there a danger here that Leipzig reach a ceiling? Because their philosophy is very much based around younger players. They sort of look for players sort of been sort of the late teens to sort of mid-20s. And they look to develop those younger players and not necessarily sell them on, but there is a focus on developing younger players and bringing them on. I think Nagelsmann even said at the end of last season that he doesn't see them competing directly with Bayern Munich, which is understandable given that there are two different levels of resource between those two clubs. But given that they finished third last season and they've done well they've done okay in the cups, is there a sense that they need to change their philosophy to become a club on the level of Dortmund or Bayern Munich, or is the Nagelsmann factor enough to really push them on to that level and develop in Europe perhaps?
I think maybe it could be a combination of both. I think maybe the Nagelsmann factor will be certainly an element to help the younger sort of players that come through to develop, because that's exactly what he's known for doing at Hoffenheim, and you see with the kind of fire sale they're having this summer, that they've lost a lot of key players, and those were players that were developed by Nagelsmann at Hoffenheim, and maybe they wouldn't have gotten the moves that they have gotten otherwise. But I think maybe what they might have to look at, if they do want to continue the Red Bull policy of buying young talent and maybe selling it on a bigger price, or developing within one of the clubs and moving them to another club, or that kind of approach, I think maybe they have to look at spending more money on the young talent and perhaps buying the best teenage talent, or the best 22, 23-year-olds that are on the market. And maybe that's where they need the backing of Red Bull to come in and spend the money to be able to compete long term with Bayern Munich.
Is this still ultimately a sort of step towards the Bayern job for Nagelsmann, or does he see this as somewhere that he can sort of really put down roots and build some kind of dynasty, I guess?
I think, again, it might be a bit of both, because he was linked with them last season before Niko Kovac ended up in the job. But he chose the Leipzig project, it seems, and that's what he maybe sees himself as. That's the next step for him logically in his career. So after a few years here, we might see him maybe step up to Bayern Munich if Leipzig aren't in that dominance. So perhaps Germany could be the job for him next, with him replacing Jogi Löw or his successor a couple of years down the line, because he is the kind of the best young. Germany themselves would benefit from having someone with his tactical approach as their head coach, replacing Löw in the future.
Brilliant stuff. Ronan Murphy of Goal.com. Thank you very much for joining us.
Cheers, thanks very much.
Jez, I'd love to get your thoughts on the French contingent at Leipzig. They've signed Christopher Nkunku from PSG, who is obviously heavily linked with Arsenal, and there are a number of younger French under 21 internationals who reached the semi-finals of the under 21 European Championships. Dale Upamecano, Ibrahim Konate in particular, and Nkunku joins them. Who do you see as the best of those, perhaps? And do you see Nkunku having an effect on this Leipzig team? Is it a good signing if Arsenal missed out?
They could do. It's difficult to tell with any of these PSG youngsters. None of them seem to get decent, sort of consistent runs in the team. So they all show flashes, and possibly the only times that they're being brought in are in matches where they're going to be flattered by the opposition in any case. But Nkunku, every time he was given a chance for PSG, he did seem to perform for them. He seemed quite versatile. He seemed to build very good rapports with players who are obviously more experienced than him, more, going back to what you said before, more egotistical than him as well. So there's clearly a real talent there, and it was certainly the right time for him to move. And yeah, I think it's a pity that he didn't go to Arsenal, but teams like Leipzig and Mainz, they do seem to be stockpiling these young players and young French players, and I think it could be a good move for Nkunku. It means that he's already going to have people that he knows from the French youth setup. Obviously, people speaking common language until he gets used to the German way of things. And yeah, the others, to me, Upamecano is the class act. Him and Konate were the starting centre backs for France in the under 21 Euros. Konate looked a little bit more clumsy, a little bit sort of Bambi on ice at times. Upamecano, both as a defender, but also sort of in his comfort bringing the ball out, and at times even sort of crossing the halfway line and supporting the attack. He looked a level above, and it's not surprising that there's quite a few teams that are monitoring him and have been doing so for a few years. And I think if he has a good season this season, he may well be looking at a big money move next summer. Yeah,
it's interesting. It's a big season for all three of those players, because Upamecano came into the under 21 tournament injured, and he has struggled with injuries in the past. And you're absolutely right; he's a very powerful, very intelligent defender, and he's very, very good on the ball. And it's a joy to watch him bringing the ball out from defence. It's absolutely fantastic. And Konate was fantastic for Mainz at the end of last season. I agree that for me, Upamecano would be my preference if I wanted to pick one for my team, if you like. But both have the potential to kick on and become real top-class Bundesliga defenders. With Nkunku, be interesting to see if he settles on a best position, because you mentioned his versatility at PSG, and he was used almost everywhere apart from centre-back and in goal for PSG. He's a goal scorer, and he's very quick and direct, but whether he can affect games on a regular basis, is very much up in the air. And I felt with PSG that he was used on the left wing, and he'd come in with a cameo role, perhaps at home when they're sort of falling up against Dijon, perhaps, and score a goal, and he'd look good. But in a tight Bundesliga encounter against another top four candidate, is he a player you can rely on to perform week in, week out, and to deliver the performances that will win you games? Perhaps he's not being brought in to do that in a direct kind of way, but I don't know that he's got the presence that perhaps players of his generation do have. So it'd be really interesting to see how that figures out.
I think that to sort of refer back to another French player who's now in Germany, Corentin Tolisso, when he was at Lyon, he had the similar thing. He was played in pretty much every position going. Whenever even an emergency fullback was needed, Tolisso would be your man. And there was a concern, I think, for a while. What is his best position? Is he going to be given the chance to settle in a position? I think he's found that. Obviously, he was scuppered last year by his injury, but it's clear what his position is. As you said, I'm not entirely sure what Nkunku's is, and I hope for his sake that he's given the chance by Nagelsmann, who's obviously a clearly very intelligent coach and sort of man motivator, that he helps Nkunku to find where he's best and where he's most comfortable and allows him to develop there.
Yep, that is the Bundesliga. This is the Get European Football Show. So next, we're going to be switching to the Serie A and Italy and talking about Napoli, of course, a big win for them, if you can call a pre-season win a big win, against Liverpool yesterday, 3-0. Insigne, Milik and Nunes on the score sheet. It's Napoli next.
One thing I've learned is never judge a book by
utilize most of, and if pretty much most of his players, if all of them, versus what Sarri was really kind of criticized for, and in the sense that he didn't really utilize all the assets he had at his disposal. So I think it was always going to be a difficult task for Napoli to replicate what Sarri did in that one season where he was 4 or 5 points off knocking Juve for the title. But I think in year one, you have to be overall pretty pleased with Ancelotti and Napoli did. You have to remember, too, if it wasn't for that Milik chance saved against Alisson, they could have advanced out of their group, a very difficult group in the Champions League, and maybe things would have gone a lot differently. So overall, I think Napoli fans have to be pleased with the way season one went under Ancelotti, and you're really starting to see the building blocks. You're really starting to see his style transmit and make its way into this current squad. And some of the moves that they've made already this summer, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, it bodes well for the future, and it bodes well for a really good run next year if they, if they're up for it.
I think it's fair to say that obviously Ronaldo's still there, but there's an element of a transition period about Juventus this season. Obviously with the new coach first and foremost. So is this Napoli's best chance to really challenge them for the title?
You like to say that, and I think it's pretty spot on, because if you look at a lot of the main players that they have, remember even in January there were rumblings that Alan was going to be sold to PSG. A really big offer came in, and when you're a club like Napoli, keeping those fundamental midfielders and those key players intact, sometimes it's more important. That's more important than an actual acquisition that you make. And if you look at most of their activity this summer, they've been able to keep pretty much that entire group, bar of course Albiol, who went back to Spain, if I'm correct. So they've been able to pretty much upgrade there with Kostas Manolas, get Di Lorenzo as a fullback. They healthy Fauzi Goulam. They still have Mario Rui, Haiza. We're not quite sure how we're going to make out there. But you look at their midfield pieces and you really look at the overall assets that they have and could potentially add through the rest of this window. You got to like Napoli's chances of them being even stronger this year. And in year two at Ancelotti, you gotta like his chances to maybe press Juve a little bit more than they did last year, which it was always going to be difficult. Like I said, with Ronaldo coming in, that was just going to really elevate their game. But it's going to be a fascinating race for the title for sure. I think Napoli are going to do everything in their power, and De Laurentiis through his investments this summer. Obviously you guys talked about Nicolas Pepe being on his way to Arsenal, possibly versus Napoli, but nevertheless they're still linked with some really high-profile players that can really round out that attack. And, you have to like Napoli's chances of really pushing the envelope and really pressing forward for a title.
Absolutely. You touched on it there a little bit, but how do you see their window so far? Who do you see as those additions that's come in? Who do you see as really improving the team? And are there still holes in this squad that need filling? Is there areas that they can improve on? And are more additions expected in the final stretch of the window?
Absolutely. I do think there's going to be one or two solid signings left in the chamber for Napoli. I think if you overall look at their mercato to date, or their market, they upgraded, like I said, Albiol to Manolas. That was definitely an improvement for sure. Having a healthy Fauzi Goulam definitely is going to help. Di Lorenzo is coming of age. Wouldn't be surprised if he makes his Azzurri debut very soon. That midfield's looking very balanced. They have Alan Zielinski. They have a couple players coming in as well. And you look up front who they're starting to be linked with. If they're able to land a Mauro Riccardi, and we're not quite sure how that's going to shape up, you got to like their chances, overall top to bottom. I don't see many holes in their squad. Many people would look at and say, if they can just stay healthy and they keep their squad intact, they have a really good chance at challenging Juve. Having said that, I think Juventus, you have to look, they have 2 to 3 deep in every position, and I think there's very few in Europe that have that luxury. But I think at the same time, you have to really chances, and you put shape up this year.
Brilliant. Matt Santangelo of the State of Play podcast, GIFN and Football Italia, thanks very much. One thing I'd love to get your thoughts on Napoli-wise, Jez, is Adam Unas. I thought a fantastic player at Bordeaux. Broke through under Willy Sagnol, and at one point was keeping Willy Sagnol in a job. And I remember a particularly important goal, a home to Troyes, a volley in the last minute that I think Sagnol would have gone if he hadn't scored that goal. And he became one of the most important players very quickly, but was sort of quickly sold on, as does happen in France with sort of younger developing players. Do you see his career as having stunted at Napoli? Because he's come in, and when I've seen him play and he's come on and he's looked promising, and he scored the odd goal, and obviously was prominent for Algeria at the African Nations Cup, scored a hat-trick in one game. But it seems like that his growth is kind of stunted. There was talk of him going the other way with Nicola Pepe if he were to go to Napoli. How do you see the state of play with Unas, and do you still see him as a prospect?
I think you have to still see him as a prospect for the moment, but I think he's another of several of these sort of youth products from within France who possibly it's more their attitude rather than their footballing ability that has held them back to an extent. And he did do well at Bordeaux, but then he started pushing for a move, I think quite early on, where possibly he'd have been better advised staying on for another year or two to continue his development there. And moving to a club like Napoli, where I think there's much higher expectations, there's a lot more pressure from media and also obviously the home fans, I guess was going to be the making or breaking of him. Actually, probably as it turns out, it hasn't yet been either, but it does feel like a frustration that had he stayed in France maybe a year or two longer, we'd be seeing a more consistent player, and I don't think he's ever shown that consistency. That I think possibly the obvious, it might be lazy, but the obvious comparison is maybe a Ben Arfa type who, his skill set is pretty complete, but it's just in the head where maybe there's a couple of gaps.
Yeah, it's really interesting. His sort of story is kind of indicative of so many players that come through Liga, and perhaps, as you mentioned, left a year too early. We talked about William Saliba last week and the potential of him leaving a little bit too early. Obviously, he's going to go back to Saint-Etienne on loan, we hope, this season, so there could be some development there. And also, not finding first-team football is another huge thing for developing young players. We talked a lot about it last week as well, that you move abroad as a younger player, you need to play, and there's a real opportunity for players like Unas, and I think he's a really good example of needing to develop and needing first team football to really kick on to the next level, and he's just simply not got it. And I think that he does fit the Napoli mould. He's almost like an Insigne light, that he sort of plays in a very kind of similar way, and could fill that role in the team.
That's one of my frustrations with Napoli as a whole, and yeah, maybe Insigne and Unas are sort of the personification of the team. That, okay, maybe Juventus have pretty much got the titles sewn up each year, but as an alternative, you'd want to see Napoli doing a little bit more maybe in Europe. And you look at the last two seasons, there was the Alisson save that Matt referred to. They did beat Liverpool though in the group stage. They gave PSG a couple of scares. The year before, I think they gave City a scare, and Guardiola said that they're amongst the best teams in Europe. Yet both seasons they failed to qualify from the group. And although second place finish 2 years in a row in Serie A is great, when you look at who's beaten them to the title each time, I think maybe as a Napoli fan, there's got to be a little bit of frustration there that they haven't gone a little bit further, at least in Europe.
Yeah, I think that's a real hole in sort of their CV, and that of recent Napoli performances, that getting into Europe would be really key. And can't win the league, perhaps. Maybe this season there's a little bit of an opportunity, but I really feel like that they should be perhaps even prioritising the cup competitions, and that go and win the Coppa Italia, go and win the Europa League, because you've got the squad to do it. But I know that when Sarri was in charge, they thought they could win the league, and they came very close. That Koulibaly goal at Juventus, and the place where I was watching that went absolutely crazy when that went in. But still, lot to be done at Napoli, I think.
And a lot more to come on the show, chaps. We are going to be jumping to France after the hour, where we're going to be chatting about André Villas-Boas and his new job at Marseille.
Love sport.
You are listening to Love Sport Radio. It is indeed the Get European Football Show. Me, Matt Beadle, here for another half an hour with the guys from Get Football, Adam White and Jeremy Smith. Now, before we go to Marseille, there's a bit of breaking news to bring you, and that is from the Football League, that Bolton's game at Wycombe on the opening day of the season will not go ahead. Bolton's game at Wycombe won't go ahead, but Bury's clash with MK Dons sorry, I've got that completely wrong. Bolton's game against Wycombe will go ahead. Bolton are playing at Wycombe, but Bury's clash with MK Dons has been suspended. Obviously, both clubs we know have got points deductions ahead of the new campaign, but Bolton's game with Wycombe will go ahead, and Bury's clash against MK Dons is suspended. A game we imagine won't be suspended, chaps, is André Villas-Boas' first game in charge of Marseille.
Absolutely, it's a really interesting appointment, and it's kind of classic Marseille to some extent. But on the line to discuss just that is Mohammed Ali of GFFN. Hi there, Mo.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks, mate. I'd love to get your thoughts on this Villas-Boas appointment. How has it been perceived in Marseille, and has it been welcomed by the fan base?
Good question. I mean, it's been cautiously welcomed, and that's not really because of Villas-Boas himself, who's largely spent about a year and a half, 2 years in the wilderness. But the fact that a lot of people are just relieved that Rudy Garcia has gone, so I think anybody would be seen as a bit of an upgrade after what was really a very, very poor season. So just having a change at the top can mean a new plan, a new start for the upcoming season.
I've got to ask, looking at your pre-season so far, it's been pretty up and down. It's gone well in America, but before that, there was a 4-0 defeat to Rangers, and also Accrington Stanley. Who are they?
Yeah, I don't think we can read too much into that, to be honest. Given that some of the players were away and had started sort of pre-season a little bit late, but also the fact that it's it's just one of those things where I think one of the teams are up for it. Obviously, we don't want to discount the fact that Accrington had pulled off a very, very good result. But, it's one of those things that I think all you can take away from actually playing, league opposition in the United States and beating them after falling behind in both games, that is something that you can actually take away a tangible sort of performance analysis for the new season. So, as good as Accrington was, I'm sure for their fans, the results that happened or occurred in America is probably of more importance.
It'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on Villas-Boas' challenges in general. But before we do that, I'd love to get your thoughts on what went wrong for Rudy Garcia. You mentioned that most of the fan base was happy to see him go. But what were his main failings, and what really sort of ended his tenure at Marseille?
Good question. It's more or less that he was the chief architect and I think the person that shouldered a lot of the blame for last summer going wrong, and not only in his sort of tactical approach to games, but also the lack of focus in the transfer market. I think Marseille probably had more money to spend last summer than at any point in this decade, and have absolutely squandered it. So the club spent about 60 million euros on 3 players, 2 of which have poorly performed, one who ended up performing only in the last 2-3 months of the season, and then his record against the big clubs, so Paris Saint-Germain, Lyon, Lille, and Monaco, those results were appalling last season. The fact that the club failed in the Europa League, having just reached the final in 2018, 1 point out of potential 18, was very, very poor. And the tactical approach never really sort of got going afterwards. Marseille were conceding goals left, right, and centre, conceding a European record, a European high penalty against several matches. And not only that, I think also his approach in press conferences also really rankled with a lot of fans online. He would always, find something to blame. If it was the referee, if it was weather, like one of the guys of Arsenal Fan TV will always have a reason to say that we've lost 3-0, but, we could have scored 4. And just I think a lot of people are really, really glad to see the back of him.
So Villas-Boas is already a trophy winner. You've already won the EA, I think it's the EA Sports Ligue 1 trophy, if I'm not mistaken. So what are his his sort of aims, or Marseille's aims for this season. You talk about last summer and the poor transfer window. It seems like this summer Marseille is sort of hamstrung and pretty much can't have a transfer window. So what would represent a successful season?
What would represent a successful season, first of all, would probably be a cup. And OM have, perhaps to a fault, ignored the domestic cups in the last couple of years. You know, a lot of early eliminations, a lot of not really taking it seriously. And when they do take it seriously, they always find lower league opposition coming up trumps. So for Villas-Boas to really, take advantage of the fact that this is a season where there's no European football, the club can play a maximum 48 games. This is a chance to really see, what he can do against, especially in the Coupe de la Ligue. I think 4 games will earn you a trophy if you ended up winning those. So that would be tangible success, first of all. Shoring up the defence, he is a defensively minded coach. The football might be methodical, but it's not exactly interesting. OM has sort of been hamstrung by decent attacking football, but absolutely shocking defensive structures. So if he can bring the sort of functional football that he had in Zenit and also in England, and ensure that OM becomes sort of the boring 1-0 win team that it was under Eli Bokor in a couple of years ago, then we might have something on our hands as well. But also to really just ensure that the club is stabilised as well. That's his immediate challenge. Obviously, the transfer market is not helping. As you can say, he's not been able to bring in the players that he wants. So far, one has only signed. Another one is due to come this week. But having lost 8 from the first team since May, he's going to have to find a couple of methods to sort of stabilise. And of course, with Ricardo Carvalho alongside him, the defence should be of prime focus.
What does Villas-Boas really have to work with? You sort of touched on it there about sort of players leaving and a lack of additions. So far as talk of Dario Benedetto coming in from Boca Juniors, which is a signing I think could be potentially really good. But if Florian Thauvin were to leave, although he was a little bit up and down last season, but his stats remained decent. If he were to leave and go to Valencia, as being suggested, Dimitri Payet's was pretty terrible for long stretches last season and out of the team. There's talk even of Luis Gustavo going. Whether that happened, I don't know. But given the lack of budget and the lack of a squad with players sort of on the way out, what really does Villas-Boas have to work with going into next season? Where are the main strengths of the team?
I think the challenge is that players are not leaving, and there is a case of the playing staff is stale, and they have sort of developed a mentality and developed an approach which a new coach might be at odds with. So with the likes of Thauvin and Gustavo and Payet and the rest, they were to some extent architects of a very, very poor season last year. And obviously to start with a new approach and a clean slate, you need to turn over those players. And the trouble is that OM have few marketable players, and the ones that are marketable have no offers this summer. So Samson, for example, €30 million midfielder, there's no buyers. Thauvin, Valencia and Arsenal have been maybes for much of the summer, but no concrete action. Gustavo would be a massive loss because obviously he is a very, very key player in the midfield. Strootman, who was a very costly signing, specifically for Rudy Garcia, there's no takers for him as well, especially on the wage that he's on. And that, so much, with those 3 or 4 players, you could easily earn about 80 million in transfer revenue, which in turn, with a couple of smart manoeuvrings and some keen, bargain buys in the loan market, you could buy 6 or 7 players in that and develop those within the Villas-Boas system. But because of the fact that there's no bias, and the truth is, Marseille's players are not as good as they think they are. Because it's Marseille and because it's in France, they have a heightened profile, whereas perhaps Thauvin might not be in definitely not in the starting 11 of clubs above of Marseille's level across the big 5 leagues. And that just makes for a perfect storm that Villas-Boas is unable to bring in those players, and you're just going to have to rely on those players to sort of ditch their mentality and ditch the bad experience that they had and just come in, with a clean head. And obviously Euro 2020 is not that far away now, so the likes of Payet with the international tournament after missing the World Cup for France. You never know; he might end up picking his time well again and ensuring a fantastic season for us.
Interesting stuff, Mohammed Ali of GFFN. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jez, Marseille. It's been a pretty terrible few years for them, to be honest. You look back to the season they finished 13th, and the fans were sort of comically playing the Benny Hill theme from the stands and holding large pictures of goats in the stands, which is sort of the French equivalent of being called a donkey. And last season they showed flashes, having really set themselves up the season before, getting to the Europa League final. It felt like Garcia was finally having an impact. Florian Thauvin had a fantastic season 2 seasons ago. He was unplayable at times in Ligue 1, and it disintegrated over the course of this season, and Dimitri Payet fell out of the team. Those players that Mohammed Ali mentioned there, a lot of what you said I agree with. The signings were pretty terrible coming in last summer, failed to improve the team, and it completely fell away. Mario Balotelli hasn't been re-signed, although he had a huge impact to start with. It just feels like that it's a club with endemic issues that is going to take a long time to rectify, right?
I think that there's a couple of things in Marseille. One of them is that it's always black and white there.
Yeah.
Either everything is perfect and we're going to win the Champions League next year, or we're massively in crisis. So I don't think that helps. I think it's difficult for any, certainly coach, but the playing staff as well, to really function under that kind of pressure. The other thing is that unlike quite a few teams, Lyon particularly, even PSG to an extent, they've never had any kind of youth system. So they've never been able to cover the odd bad signing by bringing a youth player through. This summer, because they haven't been able to bring anyone in, there's been lots of talk of a change of tack and more emphasis on the youth system. They've got a couple of players to work with. Boubacar Kamara was one of the few successes of last season, and so far he and the club have resisted quite a lot of interest for him. And I think possibly that might be another way for the club and the fans to look at things. Even if they were to have another sort of 5th or 6th place finish, even if they were to miss out on Europe, if at the end of the season they can look back and say we've brought in 3 or 4 of our youth team players and they've become sort of first team squad members, hopefully regulars in the first team, and people starting to look at them next summer, then I think that might sort of start off a new kind of positive circle. Obviously the next step is even if they weren't going to get into Europe, they could do a Lyon, sell these players on for a lot of money, and then they've got more of a transfer kitty to work with, whether they've got that European money coming in or not. And also I think it would help the fans. I think they would be more forgiving of players that have come through the Marseille youth system than these really expensive signings like Balotelli, like Strootman, who's the obvious one that's getting a bit of stick now because he's so associated with Garcia and the wages he's on. I think that could be a complete change of sort of angle for everyone in the club to look at how things work and how to define success, and it could work long term for the club.
Interesting they hold up goats as a form of abuse. That, of course, has taken on a slightly new meaning in recent years, the greatest of all time. So perhaps players can see that as a positive gesture in the seasons to come. Of course, Marseille, another player who did play for Marseille, not the greatest of times there, was Patrice Evra, who at 38 years old has today announced his retirement from the game. Of course, not a great time at Marseille, but a great time at Man United and Juventus. 5 Premier League titles, 2 Serie A titles and a Champions League. Patrice is saying that he's going to be ready to lead a team in about 2 years' time. One thing's for sure, they are going to love this game. This is Love Sport.
This is Love Sport. Love Sport Breakfast.
and only 5 goals in 30 matches, and he started I think 26 of them. So I don't know if he was sort of suffering from Ronaldo taking that leading role, but that being the case, it certainly suggests that maybe it's time for him to look elsewhere. And I don't think anyone disputes what a good player he is, and a good free kick specialist as well. So I think he'd be a great addition to most teams across Europe if they can afford him.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I feel like there's sort of an emotional difference between the 2 seasons you mentioned. Before, Paulo Dybala was the man at Juventus. He was the number 10. He was the player that they looked to in important games. Didn't necessarily always hit the ground running in the bigger games, but there was an emotional sense that he was the centre of the club, and that emotional centre has shifted over the last few seasons, and now he's very much on the fringes. With Ronaldo, especially with Ronaldo signing, a change of manager this summer, perhaps there's a little bit of a doubt over that where that leaves him in the team, and it just feels like he's not being told that he's loved anymore. He's sort of on the fringes of that team, and that there's a sense that perhaps they could do without him, and perhaps the Juventus have just sort of moved on. Looking a little bit further down, one from GFFN, my apologies. Dani Alves has offered himself to Barcelona and Juventus and has interest from unnamed English and Brazilian clubs. How did you see his time at PSG? I feel like he was meant to be brought in as a winner. That was sort of what the club said when they signed him. He was signed as more almost for the dressing room more than the pitch, and it felt like he contributed to the inherent sort of cliquey nature of that Paris Saint-Germain dressing room, and played into the strength of the Brazilian contingent with Marquinhos and Thiago Silva and Neymar. And it felt like that he didn't really put in any really standout performances. He was consistent for a bit last season, perhaps under Tuchel, not really playing at right back, though Tuchel doesn't always play over 4, of course. And it just felt like that it was sort of a minus point for PSG, Dani Alves' influence, rather than the coming in to do the job that he was supposed to do.
I think PSG fans seem to be split down the middle with him. There's a lot who thought he was fantastic both on and off the pitch, and others who thought he was underwhelming. And for me, he sort of played very well, maybe one match in every 3. But as you said, he at the end of the season, he came out with a lot of quotes, and I think possibly with half an eye to look to moving on, about how he wished that the club had listened to him more, and if they had listened to his advice, they might have got further in the Champions League, that kind of thing. But certainly, publicly anyway, it looked like he was causing more problems than he was solving. And the famous spat between Neymar and Cavani about who to take the penalty in that same match, there was a disputed free kick as well, and Alves actually grabbed the ball off Cavani to give it to Neymar. So I think that probably said a lot about those cliques and where exactly Alves fell. I mean, there's a lot of people who think that, although I think he came first, that he was signed in order to provide a friend for Neymar when he arrived. So, certainly not an unmitigated success. And, I know he obviously had a very strong Copa America final, and there's obviously a very good player there, but I find that it's maybe more the exception than the rule nowadays. And, I was amused at him seeing that he's kind of resorted to advertising himself on Instagram.
It's interesting you touched on it there a little bit, but the way that Paris Saint-Germain dressing works, that image of him sort of stealing the ball from one player to give it to another, just really highlighted how fractured that dressing room can become. And it really brought my mind back to a situation that perhaps has sort of played out over the last few seasons when Zlatan Ibrahimovic was there, and he was probably the instigator of what became an extremely sort of divided and cliquey squad, and it was Kevin Trapp. And we briefly mentioned Kevin Trapp last week, and since Trapp joined as from Frankfurt, I think for 9 million, he's looked sort of overawed and has had zero confidence. And there was a game at the Parc des Princes, and they were geeing themselves up in a tunnel when Kevin Trapp was going around to each PSG player, high-fiving them and getting himself pumped up. And he walked over to Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and Ibrahimovic basically ignored him. He sort of tapped him on the shoulder and continued doing whatever he was doing, tying his shoelace or talking to one of his other teammates. And it just summed up the lack of togetherness in that dressing room with one very small moment, but just chimed quite true with the way that Dani Alves took that ball from one player and gave it to another. It really does sum up the way things seem to go at PSG. Moving on to Get French Football News at GFFN. Looking a little bit further down, we talked a lot about Nicolas Pepe over the course of the show. Hervé Renard is set to become new manager of Saudi Arabia after a pretty average AFCON with Morocco. Hasn't really worked out for him there, although has a pretty nomadic career. Didn't really work out for him at Lille. Former Cambridge manager, of course, but won the African Nations Cup with Zambia and Ivory Coast in consecutive editions. Hopefully he can rediscover his managerial form there. Looking a little bit further down, there's talk of Jean-Philippe Jabamon, who's at Mainz, moving on. A really interesting player who broke through at Lens. He was a right back and a centre back at one point. Do you see him as a potential player that could develop in a slightly bigger club?
I think he could. He, as you said, he started off as a defender and looked sort of tall, strong, quite relatively sort of classy looking player. And at Mainz, he seems to have moved forward to a more defensive midfield role, and he's the name that's been most linked with Everton as a replacement for Idrissa Gueye. So, yeah, judging by the coverage from Germany, he seems like he could be a very good replacement, and possibly not quite an upgrade in terms of that defensive side, but certainly in terms of the ball playing side, he might add a little bit more than Gueye has offered the last couple of years.
Just a little bit further down, Mariano Diaz is a player that's cropped up on the GFN Twitter feed. Looking to leave Real Madrid after a season after joining from Lyon. A really interesting transfer. He left having not really had any senior European football, coming over from East Dominican, I think, and was playing for Real Madrid reserves and rocked up at Lyon. And I think he scored 16 league goals, but there was a little bit of competition in the Lyon forward line at the time with Memphis Depay amongst others, and he ended up being the guy that lost out. And they sold him back to Real Madrid, and it seemed like an odd move for him, given that he's getting into his mid-20s now and doesn't really have too much experience overall, and it just felt like a bit of a backward step because he wasn't really going to get games at Real Madrid, didn't play much last season, and surprise he's looking to move on again into this summer. It's
one of Lyon have had quite a few impressive coups the last few years, but that was one of the best ones, kind of buy relatively cheap from Real Madrid. One season, 18, I think it was, goals, something like that, and then sell for a profit to the same club. Possibly it was wishful thinking on his part to think that he was going to go straight back into the Real Madrid first team after an albeit very good season at Lyon. But yeah, I think his experience has shown that, I suppose it depends what his priorities are, but you'd have thought playing week in, week out in the first team of one of the top 5 leagues would be better than warming the bench at Real Madrid. So there's rumours of him going back to France and possibly to Monaco, who have had a nightmare of a year or so, really bad transfer window last summer, and supposedly they were going to change tack this summer and go more for experienced internationals rather than raw youth, but frankly they haven't brought in anyone of any kind so far, and Diaz seems a sort of wishy-washy compromise, and he's not coming in anyway. So,
just very finally, before we finish up, a very brief word on Get German Football News at GGFN. Dodi Luka Bacchio has agreed a 5-year deal with Hertha Berlin. Bundesliga club has submitted a 20 million offer to Watford, according to Bild. An interesting move.
Interesting because it has other implications. Obviously, it's connected to the Pepe move. It could be connected to Ismaila Sarr moving to Watford. So it's one to watch, but not the most exciting of moves.
Not the most exciting of moves, says Jeremy Smith of Get Football. This has been the Get European Football show on Love Sport. Remember, medicals being completed for Idrissa Gueye and Nicolas Pepe going to PSG and Arsenal, respectively. We'll be back next Monday, 9 p.m. Get European Football show on Love Sport.